This episode of Fresh and Buds is brought to you by Channel Rowan's brand new single, Oscillio. You know how it goes, folks. Oscillio. You can make your spells go. It's a banger, folks. So, it's Fresh and Buds now.
Fresh and
All right, folks, welcome back to yet another episode of Fresh and Buds. I'm your host, Tommy Fresh, and you are all of my buds, and today we are joined by an awesome new bud for me, Mitch Leslie, aka Uber. How you doing, my friend? Welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. Yeah, we met like 10 seconds ago, so we're off to a great start, I think. Thank you very much for having me on the show, man. It's I'm sure it's going to be a good time.
Yeah, absolutely, and hopefully, meet some more in person, in the flesh and blood going forward as more and more awesome tournaments happen around the world. We got a great show for you all. We're going to get to know Mitch a little bit, give him the old Fresh and Buds treatment here, and pick his brain on some stuff in terms of the commentating side of Flesh and Blood and the overall world of kind of esports in general. Now, first of all, I've come to know you through Flesh and Blood. I will say that, but you do have an illustrious career beyond just Flesh and Blood. When did you realize that you wanted to have a career in gaming?
Yeah, I think that I fell into it a little bit. I started commentating in 2009 as a hobby, actually. And yeah, that was all it really was for quite a long time. This is probably like kind of before anyone would have considered it remotely viable as a profession. I was like a Call of Duty 4 player back in Australia on PC. So played like between like '09 and 2011, 2012, playing that a lot. There was a really good competitive mod for the game called Pro Mod. So even with like, Call of Duty 4 being a little bit old at the time, and even like Black Ops 1 came out, people were still playing COD 4 Pro Mod competitively, especially on the PC. That was like the heyday, I think, for PC COD. So I was playing that in Australia, and I had like a decent sort of like, mid to higher level team. We played at some sort of LANs and stuff like that. And I got to rub shoulders with a lot of really good players and learn from them and sort of get involved. And eventually, I couldn't really keep it up. I mean, we were scrimming, we were practicing like 40 hours a week. It was just ridiculous. It was like I would get home from work or university, and it would be like 8 hours a night of just like banging out scrim after scrim. Just very unreasonable, especially considering how much prize money was on the line back then. But we did it obviously because we loved it. We really wanted to win, but it really was pervasive into the rest of my life. And at some point, I'm like, okay, this is, I think I have to go into Sydney, winning a LAN and getting $500 for it. I'm like, okay, yeah, this is maybe just covered my travel costs. So, no, yeah, I sort of stepped back a bit. I was studying at the time at university, trying to have a crack at an engineering degree, and I was like, man, I don't have the time for this at all. But I had a mate who was actually doing radio broadcasts for like an online radio station, which is like a hobby of some like ex-military guy in Australia. He just like wanted to run an online radio station, and he had like game commentary on there as well in the evening. So, and I had my games covered by this, before, and I always went to check it out and see what they said. But it was radio. It was before the video streaming days. Mm-hmm. So I actually got involved in that just as a way to stay involved in the community and check out my friends' games and sort of keep my finger on the pulse, because it was much less of a commitment, like a couple of nights a week, maybe 2-3 hours. And, I was still very much involved, and that seemed like a way to do it sustainably. So yeah, I sort of stuck with that for a while and, got my degree. I wouldn't say that the job market in Australia was great for engineers at the time. Mm-hmm. So I ended up just continuing the casting as a hobby, and I started to get a couple of gigs and offers to work. And I realized at one point that like I was starting to travel a little bit to Europe to host some of their events for a pretty obscure game called World of Tanks. So at that point, I took like a part-time, or it was like a full-time job with a lot of flexibility at like for Americans, it was like a CVS basically. Mm-hmm. For Australians, it was a Chemist Warehouse. And I was like a storeman there. That was my job. And I just they were pretty flexible with like me going off to Poland or wherever for a couple of weeks every sort of few months. And that was where I was able to, like sustain myself and also, get to dip my feet into gaming. And I think that's when I started to realize that the opportunities were starting to come a little bit more frequently and there might be something there. But it wasn't until I got offered a contract to leave Australia to go and live in Germany and be a full-time caster that, did I realize that there was any viability to it.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, you say with 2009, it's like when you were playing a lot of COD 4 and stuff like that. Like that's was the heyday. Like in terms of anybody I know that played any kind of FPSs, right? That was when people were playing it, and the fact that esports wasn't really like a thing then, or maybe it was. It was kind of the calm before the storm, and you kind of like were able to ride that wave, which is really neat. Now, when it started happening, right? You got your contract. You go to Germany. Did you see it just like continuing to go the way it went, right? Did you feel like, okay, this is really cool. Hopefully this is a good opportunity. Maybe I do it here and then move on? Or were you like, you know what? I'm sticking to this. This is really awesome. I want to do this for the rest of my life.
Honestly, like maybe I'm still like this now. Probably maybe the only way that someone can actually still work in esports without any dissonance. But I didn't think too much into the future. Honestly, when I went out there to Germany, like the pay was fine. It was like I could like live in an apartment with a roommate and have enough beer money. But that was kind of it. Sort of paycheck to paycheck a little bit there. But the job was pretty chill. It was like 3-4 nights a week. I'd be, like at the studio casting a bunch of different games. And then during the day, I'd like come to work at like 1 p.m. and I'd maybe watch some VODs and do some study and also play a lot of video games at work. So like, and that was part of my job. It was like, you need to go and learn these games. You got to cast a Battlefield 4 show on Wednesday, Rocket League on Thursday, and then World of Tanks on Friday. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I'll get watching and get playing and just sort of try and stay current with it. So, I don't know if I necessarily thought I'd take off, especially initially. The guys out there at ESL was a company I worked for, took a bit of a punt on me, I think, because it's pretty unheard of that they sort of pluck a bloke out of Australia and sort of fly him out there to sort of become an employee and get my visa in Germany and all that sort of stuff. But I was one of the very few, I guess, at the time who had been able to like acquire the skill set organically as an esports commentator, because there wasn't really like any pathways into that, not in ways that you could sustain yourself in the past. And even in Australia, it's really basically impossible, I think, to be a full-time commentator. It's just not a thing. So, I didn't really, I was very much living in the moment, far too many brewskis, and just sort of having a good time. But, the industry continued to grow up around me, I guess, while I was sort of in Germany. And I think like between 2014 and like 2018, we really started to see some larger like esports franchises and like programs pop up that along with that, came opportunities for people like me to turn it into like a viable career for sure.
Yeah, and you clearly do a lot of different games, right? Even recently I've seen maybe some Brawl Stars or Valorant or something like that.
Yeah. Too many.
That is a lot of different games and a lot of different that's different things, right? You have to learn those things. You have to learn about these games and you have to be able to call these games, and you do it very well. How do you do that? And what are some other games that maybe, that some of us haven't even heard of that you've been calling?
Yeah. It's a fair question. I think like the thing about gaming, I think like anything that you commentate is that the domain knowledge is extremely extensive. Even as a play-by-play commentator where I'm not really being expected to be the expert and to give like this really deep granular analysis that only like professional players of a game would offer, you really do need to understand what is happening at quite a high level. So I think like most of my work week, frankly, is consumed by developing or maintaining that like level of understanding and knowledge about a game. And that gets particularly challenging when now I'm working so many different games. Because in the past, I worked for Activision Blizzard on the Overwatch League for like 6 years. 6 years. And they just paid me a salary. They were like, all right, you're ours for the year. You do our games. You don't do anyone else's. We're paying you for the exclusivity. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. That
Fair
is
enough.
like, and we're talking the kind of money that allowed me to start a family in California. So like very reasonable. But But that era is over now. So now I do have to, jump into a lot of other games. But it's how I started too when I worked at ESL, because they weren't going to give me a full-time job just to cast one Tuesday night each week of one game. So I have to spend a lot of time like watching content. Like we'll get onto it, but in Flesh and Blood, like I think the biggest edge that I had, I guess, coming in and casting is I just ravenously consumed content.
Yeah.
I'm just very into the game. And so like everyone's content, I was just like, every podcast, every like deck tech, gameplays, all that stuff I like. And so I was able to pick up a lot of even obscure things just from watching like Flesh and Blood videos, little micro obsession of mine that ended up, paying off in the end. And it's the same for other games like Valorant. Like Valorant is a game that has competition in like 5 or 6 major regions that are happening simultaneously. So keeping up with that is like frankly impossible. I can cover like 2 regions. I'd say I can cover 1 well. And that like means that like I might get home and I might be, looking after the kids until like 7:30 p.m. I'm home for the next like 3-4 hours. I'm just watching footage, man. And I'm speeding that up to 1.5x. Like I am not watching that at normal speed because it's just so much. But to answer, I guess, the second part of your question, when I first started, the first game I casted was COD 4, naturally. Then I started casting World of Tanks. I was also casting League of Legends and Counter-Strike at that time. When I went over to ESL, it was much the same. I added sort of Battlefield 4 to that repertoire. As time went on, I even casted Goat Simulator for one event. I had one point, like they're just like, "Hey, figure out this game and cast it." I'm like, "Okay, buddy, no worries." Then like Overwatch came out, and I sort of started focusing on that. As the years went on, obviously I spent time in the Overwatch League, and then I began to cast Valorant for All Stars, which I cold auditioned for in the end. They didn't sort of know who I was, and I just sort of said, "Oh, this looks like a good opportunity. Mobile games are great." And then Flesh and Blood. So I would say like about 10 to 12 different games over a career that's professionally spanned for 10 years, but like I've been casting for closer to 13, 14 now. Yeah.
It's pretty impressive, to be honest. And like, if you say like 10 years like that, if you put in that perspective, right? You look at like maybe an actor and they do a movie a year for 10 years. You're like, whoa, they're really, doing it. And like, you're like consuming the content of these games, learning how to do the play-by-play and doing the actual work of doing the play-by-play, which is pretty impressive. Now, you mentioned that you watch a lot of content. Is it even worth, like, I know that something like Valorant is pretty skill intensive, right? Like, is it just easier for you and just smarter, to be honest, to just watch the content and not put so much stock into playing that game? Because, there's probably some kind of edge to knowing how to play the game, obviously, but you can gain that from watching content. Do you play at all?
Yeah, I do. I think in the past it's been much easier to justify. I would say that like understanding the game at a high level and watching that footage is probably number one, but playing it is important too, because you need to understand how it feels to be a player in that situation, because you have to convey like stakes, gravity, difficulty, mechanical complexity of like a lot of things that happen, right? So in Flesh and Blood, like I need to understand like what it's like to be facing down a dominated crippling crush with no armor, or like I know to some degree what it feels like to be in that spot, because there's a lot that is implied to, and there's a lot of like assumed knowledge, I think, when it comes to Flesh and Blood casting or just content in general, right? But if you are like a new player, or even if like you're like a hard specialist, like it's not always easy to know. The thing is that Flesh and Blood specialists need to understand other decks even more, because they have to have a matchup point for all of them. So I would be pretty trash as a commentator if I didn't play the game a fair bit. I think like there's a limit. I am not a high level player at any of those games. I think the best I've ever been at a game I've cast is Overwatch, and I was Diamond. So we're not even talking like, again, that puts me in like the top 12%, I think, of players, but I'm not an elite player in any of those games. But I'm also kind of dog shit at games. I'm just not that great. This is the way it is. I think it's an amount of time investment that I've not been able to make, especially since my firstborn came along in like 3.5 years now. Like after that point, it's like, mate, forget about it. You might get some casual gaming in, but like, let's be real, it's not happening. So also like I can burn out on zero-sum competitive games after a while. Some people just love to compete. Sometimes I like, I don't know, collecting some chicken eggs and planting some, like playing games like that as well. So when your profession and your like hobby overlap, it can be really hard to like do it in such a way that it is fulfilling after a while. Like it can always feel like work a little bit. And that's, I don't really like, you've got to draw a line at some point. You've got to make sure your gaming experience can be like something that's just enjoyable and not just strictly for the purposes of work. So, yeah, you do need to know a bit. Like, I am not like in the Flesh and Blood context, for example, I'm not a high level Flesh and Blood player. I'm a specialist. I play one hero, and I just want to play that one hero. But through that hero, especially the way that they operate, which we can talk about later, I've had to understand what every other motherfucker does, because more often than not, it's at a higher rate than what I can do. So you have to approach every matchup in sort of understanding what the power turns are supposed to look like and how to like make best use of your resources. So losing a lot has helped me. Losing a lot to everyone, every hero, I think, even Arachne, all too frequently, as we might have seen on 3 Floating not so long ago. So yeah, not a high level player, but you do have to spend the time. It's just tricky when you are watching content, playing games for fun, and then playing games for work. It's like, where does that all fit? And like, how much of each of those should happen is something that only experience can help you figure out.
Yeah, it's a dangerous line to toe, right? Like when you are doing for your job something that you enjoy. I'm personally, I was into beer. I work for a brewery, so that's what I do, right? And at first, that sounds awesome. And then you're like, I don't know if I want to look at another beer for the rest of my life until the next one, of course. And then, and then we're back on it, and then whatever. But that's some personal demons I'm fighting. But but that
glasses, brother, don't worry about it. The next beer looks pretty good through the bottom of the first one. You know what I'm saying?
It sure does. Now, so it's pretty impressive to kind of find that kind of middle ground where you can recognize that, and I think that probably is going to contribute to your longevity, if I had to guess. And also having a family and having some other priorities definitely helps, because then everything gets put into perspective, which is pretty neat. Now, for myself, I wanted to get your perspective on this, because I was never really much of an esports consumer, right? I never really watched a lot. I watched a lot of Magic streams and stuff like that. Always TCG stuff in my years gaming. For Fab fans out there like myself, what kind of games would you suggest that we start watching to like get into that world if we were to want to?
I think like the first step, honestly, is most of us Fab players play some game casually, right? And you'd be surprised how many of those games actually have like a competitive scene. No matter how small it sort of may be. I do think that like a lot of the most straightforward games are like your Counter-Strikes of the world. I think that's like, and so Call of Duty, they're probably the most face up in terms of like what you're dealing with. They all have their intricacies. And the one thing that can hold esports back, I think, is how inaccessible it can be. But Flesh and Blood players should be familiar with this, because that's also our game, right? Fab has an extremely high barrier to entry and a lot of like assumed knowledge. And it's a low variance game where like the player experience more often than not trumps like the power of the deck that they're playing, with with some exceptions, I think. But in general, right, like it's, unless we're playing Starvo, it's low variance. So so I recommend that stuff. Like Counter-Strike, to me, it is definitely like probably one of the most known and loved esports in the world. And it is relatively straightforward, right? You've got terrorists, counter-terrorists. They're trying to take each other out. There's grenades. There's weapons that are, for those that are into that stuff, or they are ones in real life as well. It's some realism to the game. And, I might be biased, but the commentators over there are very good. A lot of them I actually came up with at ESL, which felt like a Charles Xavier school for the gifted of esports casters. So it was very cool that we had like a bit of an academy over there. But I don't cast CS right now. I still think that's definitely one of the best games that's worth checking out. MOBAs are tough because there is a lot of assumed knowledge. And in MOBA games, you like buy these items that enhance your character, and there are like hundreds of them. Yeah. So there's a lot of context that you're missing just looking at the broadcast. But I do think that like League of Legends commentators are pretty good at making the game accessible, especially at large events. They will explain that stuff to you. Dota, I've found their commentators are very skilled, but that is an insular game. Like it is, you really need to understand. Like that is a hardcore game. Overwatch, if you play it, worth watching the Overwatch League. My style and my co-commentator style is generally to try and like make things easier to digest, but at the end of the day, it's 10 Pixar characters trying to run around and kill each other. So it's a lot. It's so much.
Yeah.
It's like a commentator in that game is like trying to catch a waterfall with a spoon. It's just crazy. And Valorant is in the same vein, quite complex because it's like Counter-Strike in that you're all shooting each other, but also everyone's like someone's throwing a fireball. There's a big wall of toxic gas. There's a big, everything turns to water and grabs you if you stand still for too long. And there's like a lot of these like abilities that are just like really involved. So Warzone as well is great. It's like a battle royale game, but it's like pretty straightforward. People are driving around. They're trying to escape the gas. It's Hunger Games-esque, right? So yeah, those are definitely the games I recommend. But yeah, outside of that, like it's well worth heading over to like Twitch or something and just like seeing what's going on, what people are playing. A great way to get into a game competitively is like find a streamer that you like, because most of them are really good, and that can be a cool door in as well. Like Overwatch has a bunch of top streamers that also like will stream the esports games and hang out and talk about them. And there you can actually interact with them and sort of hang out quite a lot of the time, and it can be quite worthwhile. But it's a whole thing. Esports is a whole world out there. And I love it to death. But yeah, there is a huge amount to know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it seems like a lot of it is kind of tied to the commentator kind of making it accessible, right? Whether you know the game or not, which is kind of cool. And it's the same for any kind of commentating. You look at sports or anything like that too, the people, the best commentators of any sport can make it understandable for anybody, which is great. Now let's talk about some Flesh and Blood. Of course, I want to know, we've talked a lot about esports, your experience with them. Here we have trading card game, physical game. When did it come into your life? How did that happen?
Man, I've always loved card games. God, I love them so much. I love them so much that when I was in 4th grade, and I think that was around the time that Yu-Gi-Oh came out, right? I couldn't afford them. I would literally spend my lunchtimes in the library making my own cards. I would just make them. I would just like make up some stat lines, and like my brother would even do it as well, and mine would always be really broken, by the way, but that's just and I'd draw the art too. I liked like anime style art when I was young, and I literally would draw this. Half of them would like plagiarize from Yu-Gi-Oh. It was like the Elf Warrior. There was definitely that, but you know what I mean, like that was what I did. It's crazy now to think back to that because I was so creative. Well, I don't know where that's gone now. All my creativity has been like funneled into the nonsense that I say on broadcast. But so I literally made decks of these Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and they weren't based on the Yu-Gi-Oh cards because I don't think they were out at the time, but they were based on what they look like in the show.
Okay.
Right? So they look very different. I lived in a country town of like 12,000 people. Didn't really have anyone to play with. So like me and my brother would literally make these out of cardboard. We'd tell mum, please go to the newsagent and get these sheets of cardboard. And we would cut them up all into the same size. We'd just write text and draw on them. And yeah. So I love that stuff. Because again, a lot of my favorite shows, I guess, like Yu-Gi-Oh was a show I really enjoyed. Even like Duel Masters had a cartoon at one point, which is it's pretty bad, but I really enjoyed that as well. So eventually when I was able to, like my mum, I think bought us like when the Pokemon trading card game first came out, they had like these decks, which were, man, God, I wish I kept that. I'd be so rich. But they had like 2 halves of a deck that you could either put together or play against each other. So we got like the Psychic and Electric one. It's like Mewtwo versus Pikachu or whatever. And me and my brother played that a whole bunch. We loved that. I got the Yu-Gi starter deck when Yu-Gi first came out because I'm an idiot and didn't get the Kaiba one. So I just got rolled by Blue Eyes White Dragon. And then as I got older and, I was still living in the country, I got into Magic the Gathering. Also, the Pokemon trading card game, people don't know this. In like 95, 98, they came out with a Game Boy Color game.
Oh, yeah.
For the Pokemon trading card game. That shit is so good.
It's so good. It holds up.
I like 100% New Game Plus that game. It was just sick, and it had a lot of the cards in there. I don't know. It was because it felt like the Pokemon games, like Red and Blue-esque. But like you would go around this island and you would battle other trainers and you would get to the Hall of Fame and you fight the elite. It's just like, man, it's so good. And each time you did it, you would get one of the legendary birds, I think. And eventually I had them all and So that was great. Always like into card gaming. I started playing Magic the Gathering when I was like in my mid to late teens for those that know, Lorwyn Morningtide block.
Yep.
Around then, that's when I started playing standard.
2008-ish, 2007.
Yeah, and then into Shards of Alaris. So, like I was like a big fan of Patrick Chapin, for example, because he had the craziest decks. I played he had a 5-color control deck at the time that abused Kitchen Finks and Cryptic Command in the same deck. I was like, I'm playing this. This is absolutely busted, and I was trash. I picked the hardest deck that I could play with the most expensive mana base because Reflecting Pool at the time was like $36 a card. And I just wasn't very good. Meanwhile, my brother, who was like kind of into it, turned up with a Tree Folk Tribal deck from Lorwyn and won the FNM. And I'm like, I'm so bad at this. Oh my God. It's like, I don't even know what I'm doing, bro, but these guys are mad. Like, yeah. So when I moved to the bigger city, when I was like 17, 18, I started to play card games a little bit more. But to answer your question, I've always been a card game guy. A friend of mine who I knew because we had a mutual friend, in the Magic community. His name's Tannen Grace, for those that know. Tannen, it was a Flesh and Blood commentator, now does stuff with like Lorcana and is involved in Magic on the broadcast side. Obviously, like a mainstay in the SCG competitive scene for the longest time. Team BCW, play alongside like Ross Merriam and I forget the other gentleman's name. Very good looking guy, but Brennan DeCandio, excuse me. So I did a podcast with him, just randomly, much like this one. And we talked about broadcast because I was a caster at the time for MTG, and just like where I thought it could be improved, just sort of bringing like an esports backing to it. And we got on really well. We became great friends. We still are. Like I see him at events now. Like I just call him sometimes. I'm on the phone for like an hour, just catching up with him. And he got into Flesh and Blood and got me in. He said, hey, you should check out this game. It's Flesh and Blood. So I get into this random Discord server, invite only kind of thing. And I'm in there with like Tarek Patel testing, like Dalen Mack is in there, like Charmer's in there, Flake's in there, all these people I'd never met before. And I just sit in the voice channel harassing people like who are playing on TTS, like, hey, what does this do? Like, what's going on? And I just, learned the game and I got absolutely obsessed with it. And I think my first CC deck was, I want to say it was Briar. I played Briar at the time. So I actually won my first armory ever because Briar was busted.
Oh, yeah.
But I was like a Briar Bolton, and then I settled on Dorinthia finally, and I have not looked back, which I know many people might find surprising, considering there's a lot to look back at, especially all the new shiny heroes in the part of the Mistfire meta. But yes, I've been a Dory player since then, which is good. And it was towards the end of Monarch is when I started. No, towards the end of Everfest. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, well, this is kind of like that's like a wild throwback to, which is like crazy because like Flesh and Blood's still not that old of a game, but it can feel like it was like years and years and years ago. Like that Discord you're talking about, I remember there was like memes. There is no Discord. There is no Discord.
Yeah.
Like,
no one cared that we had a fucking Discord. Like that was the whole joke. It's like I think there was like at the time, like there were like some notable players that were in that Discord too, and they were like posting testing results and saying like, "Oh, my Discord's got a great deck" or something like that, right? And everyone's like, "Oh, get us in there," and they're like, "Oh, there's no." It was just a whole fucking joke. But it was just a bunch of guys like from the Fab and Legends of Runeterra community. Like I think Blevins brought the whole darn thing together, and I at one point I was in there every night, and I was watching Starvo mirrors and Starvo vs Prison. Like that was the time I was getting into the game. So I loved it. I learned a lot there. Everyone was really like open, friendly, helped me learn the game. Margin Bay literally taught me, like piloted me personally through learning OTK Viz at the time. Like literally told me what to do. I was like, the fact these guys like, and I was just playing a game with Dora at the time, I think. And then Margin Bay jumps in, pilots me. I think Dalen starts piloting Dora, like telling him what to do. Like these guys were just, really open and really happy to like help. So some of my fondest memories here from those early days of Flesh and Blood were those guys taking the time to like get us into the game. And I've found that experience of the community has maintained consistency all the way through my time in Fab. And it's been the main thing that has kept me in the game, I think.
Yeah. I mean, we're a passionate bunch, and then we want a lot of people to play the game. We want them to enjoy it the way we want that we enjoy it personally, which is really awesome. Now, I do want to ask you a little bit about, I wanted to, use your experience that you gained at Pro Tour LA, right? Which, that game, that finals game, it will go down and probably already has gone down. It's probably one of the greatest games in Flesh and Blood history, will go down in one of the greatest games in Flesh and Blood history. Dorinthia versus, which I'm sure that was probably tough to see Dorinthia go down. Your beloved Dorinthia against Dromai. Dromai getting basically all the points that she would need. Arthur versus Max, an amazing game, really tense, back and forth. This is like this heavy hitters, grindy meta where it's, a total opposite of what the meta is right now. It's just Zen going
very
crazy.
back then.
Yeah. But I gotta say, between your voice and Brian's voice, being a part of that stream is really what lent to kind of the legacy of that, and that means that you were able to elevate that moment, right? And that's what the casters do. That's their job. But both of you were able to do it so well. And I wanted to ask you, when you're in moments like that as a caster, right? Like you see these incredible things happen, and the game really did play out in such a dramatic way. How did you seize upon the moment to elevate it the way you did?
Yeah, I think the event was like a real confluence of things that made it a perfect storm for that kind of moment. Even for me personally as well. Like obviously I had been trying to get like opportunities to cast Flesh and Blood, like at an official event for quite a while. So much so that I like spun up the Goliath Gauntlet with my own money as prize money because I just wanted to cast some fab and maybe, get it out there. So getting to be there was obviously incredible. It worked out really well because it was in my hometown. And, that meant that like, because LSS didn't have to pay for my travel, they were able to pay me a rate that looked a bit more like what I'd get from casting esports. So like, it was able to be like, it made a lot of sense. It didn't have to be like I wasn't had to work at a loss or anything like that, which is awesome. Cause we have to pay for childcare to cover this stuff a lot of the time. That has to factor in. The fact that Dorinthia is all of a sudden a big deal. Now I'll make it really clear. I do not fuck with the hatchet style.
Okay,
I do not. Your boy played it once at Armory, and I was like, all right, I'd rather chew glass, honestly. Just because it is very rinse and repeat, right? I just felt like there was a real departure from obviously the gameplay that really made me fall in love with her. But even so, I was still very excited to see her like play so well. And also Max Klein is someone who I've watched for ages because whenever I watch like big European event, he's playing Dory and he's fucking people up. Like the guy is actually sick. And a lot of his deck lists that I've like taken inspiration from. And also one of my favorite players in the whole world is in the top 8. And someone who I'm now, can say that is a friend of mine is Josh Lau. A guy that I harassed incessantly when I first started getting into the game. That's what I did. I found all the good Dory players and I fucking made myself know to them. Like my favorite Dory player is a bloke from NorCal by the name of Shin Inoue, or Nixie, he's called. Maybe not like really well known globally, but his style resonates with me a lot. And like, bro, he did not have any choice but to be friends with me. None whatsoever. I was like, yo, I just appeared on his doorstep and started asking questions, harassing him. But again, in keeping with the way the Fab community is, they've all been really welcoming to me. So seeing Dory do so well, and as someone who had a lot of experience, like I was like, wow, this is really lucky for me because I am a specialist. I play Dory and I played a lot of hatchets. So I really think that I like can actually justify my presence here at an event like this. And I knew a lot of the matchups and understood the meta, but and obviously I could handle casting in a game. There was a lot of KO, a lot of Dromar games that I did, but I really only play Dory. I just play against a lot of these other decks, and I have to study the lists to know what I'm dealing with. So I'm like, wow, that's very lucky. And then we have an incredible story with a very diverse top 8. I felt even a Kano in there from our Brazilian player, and I don't know, it was just a special moment for me personally. So the question was like, how did you elevate it? I think first of all, I have years and years of like fundamentals so drilled into me that I don't have to think about them. So I can let myself get carried away.
Yeah.
I can let myself get caught in the moment and still guarantee that I can deliver commentary that from a fundamental and technique perspective is really solid, which is great because all I wanted to do was think about that game, that last match. It was a grinding game. And obviously we're seeing like the oppressiveness of that like Hachidori at times where she's just numerically a turn cycle over turn cycle getting above rate. Whereas obviously Dromai needs those dragons to remain to be above rate, right? She needs to be able to develop a board. And there was so much push and pull on that game. And what actually happened is that we saw how low Arthur was, and I think we saw the Spill Blood turn come in. And me and Brian are talking, and in our ear, Pankaj is sat right next to Mansan. So Pankaj is obviously casting the event, but everyone's sort of sitting around. He's got a headset on, and he whispers in our ear. He says, guys, I think Sigil of Solace is his only out here. Yeah. Because he has the list. He's looked at it, and because he's a genius. And obviously, could we like straight up? I don't think Brian buys me saying this. We didn't think of that. We thought he was dead. We thought he was like straight up dead. And then obviously Brian's like, I think Sigil of Solace is his own. We're not going to say, oh, Pankaj told me this. Like, Brian delivered it as if it was his. But and then we sort of talk about it, and like that's the story. Now it's become a story of this guy's got one card in his deck that can save him.
Yeah.
And I remember when he pulled the card, I don't know, like there was so much emotion in that game. We were so invested in it, and the whole weekend just felt like a celebration of incredible flesh and blood in a meta game that was. I also thought one of the most understandable to the outsider as well. It wasn't convoluted generally. Like it was pretty and there were a lot of games that were very mid-rangey, right?
Yeah.
And I remember when it happens because I feel this warmth on my arm as Brian has physically grabbed my hand. Like that is how invested he is. He's actually put his hand on me, and I've just seen him rip the card, and I didn't need it to be told to me because I just saw the flash of it and I just lost it.
Yeah.
I'm like, there are like 36 cards in this guy's deck. He's had to sink to dig for this card. And he's found it. And I've got to be so careful because the table judges hate it when we get excited in the booth because they're worried about the players hearing it.
Mm-hmm.
But they've got noise cancelling cans on. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm like, and we're across the hall from it. So I've just fucking let rip. I'm like, I've heard people being like, oh, yeah, it must be hard to cast Flesh and Blood when you can't be as hype as you are with esports. Mate, I was at least as hype as I've ever been in like any other huge moment in like, an FPS game or whatever. Because and I got emotional. Like, we both got emotional. I felt it. Like I was like, I don't know why. It meant so much. Like I think the game just mattered to us a lot, and we were seeing a really historical moment play out here, and the odds of it were just so low. So from that point, like, it come back to Max's turn, and he has to figure out what to do, or I think to try and find. I think he needs a spill blood there or something. Oh, sorry, a blade flurry or a reaction to win.
Yeah.
So I just get very quiet. There's almost a reverence about this moment because you've got two of the best players in the world that are in one of the most, crazy situations of their careers. So yeah, like you hear me like bring it down. Like the suspense is there. And I also really want to make sure people know how important this is. This is why like playing the game is important. Like this is such a tight spot. And there's almost like a hush that falls over the crowd as they realize like what is happening in the game. So I'm wanting to convey the tension in that moment. And then, when the game's over, when he goes for the fist bump, I get to pop off. I just, and I just black out. I say something about Game of Thrones reference or something. I'm not even sure. At that point, I'm just, off the cuff and generally enjoying it. So, me and Brian had a great time working together across the whole weekend. Someone I have a ton of respect for. And, I think we were paired up the sort of whole weekend. Brian said, like, I'd really like to work with you. And I'd worked with him before in the Goliathon. We actually brought him in to help out with that. And I was like, yeah, I'd sort of love to. And for us, it just felt like the culmination of like a really incredible weekend. And for it to finish in that way with Dory, who had like hitherto been like very much like not looked at all. She was not in the picture, in a meta that everyone expected KO to dominate. I don't know, just it was a very, very special moment. And we talked to Arthur a few times, and very unassuming guy, very quiet guy. And the interview afterwards, like I was just very humbled by his candor for a younger bloke and who was fairly new to the game. I think like everything around it gave me such an immense amount of respect for what it takes to compete at that level. And I think that I've infused my casting with that because I am looking up to these people and I am venerating them to some degree. And every turn cycle means so much to me because I love this game. And I think it shows. I think that passion is something that we all share. And I'm evangelizing this game to people. I mean, I'm evangelizing this event, this moment. Like I'm telling them this matters, and I'm going to tell you why. So
it's pretty incredible, and I will tell you, it definitely comes through the broadcast, right? And if someone were to say to me, Mitch is only a flesh and blood, only plays flesh and blood, I would believe it, right? Like you definitely, I mean, you clearly love the game and definitely have this immense amount of respect for what these players are doing, which is so cool. And I kind of love that it was like the culmination of the perfect kind of meta too, right? Super mid-rangey. I know some people don't really like that, but the kind of cool thing about a really mid-rangey meta is, to me, it reminds me of like a basketball game, right? Because, they're going back and forth. They're shooting hoops and whatever. It's big moments, like a couple dunks here, a couple threes that look good. But sometimes everything comes down to that last 2 minutes. And whoever can gain the edge in that last 2 minutes wins the game. And they have to find a way to do it. And that's what the mid-rangey things are. And that's a really exciting thing for the casters to call. Now, I do have to ask, this was, to my knowledge, I mean, really had to have been the first major tournament you're at least the highest tier, Pro Tour, where we had Brute kind of be a forefront figure in the meta. And Brute is high variance, right? A lot of highs, a lot of lows. KO, more highs than lows, but you know, there are the lows that come, and we saw it even at US Nats a couple weeks ago with Andrew Rothmel on KO.
Yeah.
What do you find those high variance heroes to be very exciting to call in a situation like that?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like, just purely from a storytelling and broadcast perspective, it's extremely fun to cast those games, and it is exciting, right? Probably not for the player who's in the seat, who has to find a way. What the player wants is actually something that's horrible for broadcast. What they want to do is mitigate variance as much as possible, which I respect. That's fine. That's not that happened in Overwatch for years. People played like a triple tank, triple support composition in Overwatch that just could not die because it was the lowest variance way to play the game. Like, pros will always orbit around this idea and find it. So I don't have an issue with that. But yeah, that high variance stuff is crazy. Like, I love that there are moments where I can get excited or have a reason to get excited. You know, you can say the same. It wasn't just the KO decks that I guess gave that variance. I think like Kano's a good example, also gave us sort of moments like that. It's objectively great for the broadcast. I just know that it will never really be ubiquitous on broadcast because of that variance. It's just something that good players will actively work to mitigate.
Yeah, it's very fun, and because, like, you know, the highs are fun to say, and then, like, you know what, the drama of the daggers of the lows, you know, when you're just like, oh man, if it was only a 6 on top or whatever, is very fun. Now, we do have some listener questions, but before we do, I want to ask you your favorite cards in the game, the fresh faves. I think we know what the first answer is going to be here, but Mitch, what is your favorite hero?
Yeah, I mean, Dorinthia is definitely my favorite hero, mate. Yeah, I am. Definitely Dory Stan. I think the class, obviously the class fantasy is great. I also really appreciate how she plays because there are a lot of branching decision trees when it comes to her lines, and I also enjoy getting to chill and check my nails while someone's trying to figure out how to block me. They'll probably end up winning the game anyway. The thing is, Dory, there's always almost always a right answer, and when you play against good players, you realize how easy it is to sort of orbit on those. So, yeah, definitely Dory. Yeah.
Dory's awesome. Great answer. What's your favorite weapon?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I remember being completely blown away by Anathos in terms of the rate it offered. Like, when I first started playing, I'm like, what? This is bullshit. This is so cool. Well, with tech plating, this is amazing. But it is Dawnblade for me. I think it's what makes like her style very exciting, that she demands respect to some degree, which I like. It also means that you can, in what is considered a mid-range deck, you actually can race even the fastest decks. You can race them. And you start the game below rate on your weapon by one counter, and then you're living large. You know, I like the weapon-centric deck because for me it really ties into that class fantasy as well. Like a signature weapon that really sort of is quite definitive. So yeah, definitely the Dawnblade. But I loved Rosetta Thorn too, because I know how effing annoying it is to block that, and I abused it as an early Briar player. So
yeah, well, two I guess highs and lows of infamousiness. Dawnblade being, you know, this revered sword, Rosetta being one that everybody, I think people are coming around on it now that they haven't played against it in a long time, but I guarantee you if we played against it again, we'd be complaining again. Equipment. Oh, yeah. What's your favorite equipment?
Honestly, Warrior's got good equips. I'm a big Brave Forge Braces guy, but dude, Mask of Recurring Nightmares is
God.
That card is absolutely that is so good, bro. Look, chilling a bit. My preview card. So when I first saw it, I was like, oh, people are gonna go nuts over this, because I remember like how annoying Coronet Peak was to play against, and every time my opponent is just like got a bunch of free chi, I'm like, oh, they're gonna banish another card. Like, it just messes. Dude, it is. I don't know if it's relevant in every stage of the game. Obviously, once your deck is more chi rich, but at that point, it's like you're just doing it for free, just banishing a card. Like, I think that card is awesome. Shame I hate Assassin. Otherwise, I'd be a huge fan of playing that. Yeah.
Yeah, that one is pretty brutal. Now, what's your favorite? Any other card, right? Any card you throw into your deck, attack action, non-attack action, reaction.
I think for looks, my favorite card in general is probably the Marvel treatment of Command and Conquer. That was generally like a gorgeous card. Even though I freak out when I see Nick Butcher playing him like just like single sleeved in his deck because the guy's crazy. But yeah, wow. Other card. I think Singing Steelblade does it for me. I think that's what really makes Dory special for me. I think it's one of the cards that like gives you that agency to in deck building, make yourself a little tool. I always love toolboxy decks, and the Dory definitely gives that vibe, I think, to sort of try and come up with something that can find you the way out. And I've punted many games by using that card incorrectly, especially blocking it, especially playing it into a defensive action from Arsenal. Thankfully, I've evolved past that point. But yeah, that card for me really does it. I love the idea of being able to search my deck for whatever I need in a certain moment. And I think that's the kind of thing that keeps a lot of Dory players asking for more.
Yeah, that is an awesome card. And this is something new we've been asking in the second episode that we're asking this. But what class and talent would you be if you were a Flesh and Blood hero?
I'd be a Light Guardian. I like the light talent. I'm very into the vibes of Solana. I just like that. I just like good guys and angels. Like I'm just that guy. Like so with Prism and Durin, I just love that shit. I don't know. I'm basic, man. It's okay. And yeah, I think Guardian is like the coolest class. Honestly, like I don't play a lot of it. I do have a Victor deck, and I do enjoy dropping Golden Dong every now and then. But yeah, Light Guardian for me would be like that's always the character I play in every D&D game. I'm like a freaking angel guy with a big old sword, or like I really enjoy the aesthetic of that. So yeah, that'll be me.
Easy. Now, listener questions. We got a couple here from the Buds in the Buds Discord. Anybody can join if you want to ask questions for future guests. First comes from Darth Prentice, a.k.a. Greg. Call your shot. Which hero wins Pro Tour Amsterdam?
New.
Oh,
I think New wins Pro Tour Amsterdam. Yeah, I think with the Bonds of Ancestry ban now, I think that New is, and Brian talked about it, I think, in the article, but definitely like in a better spot, I think, in that matchup. I think she's really strong. And she's got a couple of dodgy matchups, I think, but in general, yeah, she's very exciting to watch, and I think she might win.
Absolutely. Next question comes from Will from the Table Pit. As someone who works with casting crews all around the gaming world, how do you feel about the state of Fab coverage and its casters right now?
I mean, Fab has no business having casters as good as it does. Like, not even including you could take me out of that, and I still think it holds true. Like having a ton of like the actual developers that I know are putting in time to become good casters because I have worked with them personally, right? Brian, Mr. Classic, and others, like the literal devs are like working on the craft of casting, which is just bonkers. Pankage is like the best color commentator in Fab by a healthy margin, and honestly would be even in esports find a home. Sam, being the bloody theater kid that he is also very, very good at his job. Sam O'Byrne, obviously. And there are a lot of other great casters. I mean, even my previous colleague, Eric, who also comes from the esports side of things, he sort of jumped in and got involved. So casters are incredible. I think we need more because Fab has such global aspirations and, it's a lot of trips to do. But yeah, they're doing great. And I think like the broadcast side on it, again, it doesn't have any business being as good as it is. Like you've got someone like Ethan, Mansand, who went out and said like, I don't want to just do crappy guerrilla coverage with an iPhone. Like I want to actually invest my own money into creating incredible flesh and blood coverage at these events. I'm going to look at other and there's no like this. Honestly, I'm gonna be real with it. Ethan, bit of a dumbass because there's just not a lot of financial incentive in this. Like the guy has to find a way to pack all this shit into like 3 suitcases and then just travel around the world. Like I'm sure, like I do understand that, like Flesh and Blood recognize his contributions and do they pay the guy, right? Like I'm sure he's it's a job for him now, but like it's so much, and no one told him to do this. He just stepped up and chose to do that. I also work with Justin Liwag here in SoCal, who runs the AGE events. He owns that team and the broadcast. And mate, I just saw a broadcast tool that he's been working on. He's guy's a software engineer. It is going to I don't want to say too much. I don't want to spoil it for him. It is going to revolutionize Flesh and Blood broadcast. I'm telling you right now. It is something that we've never seen in Magic, something we've never seen in any other card game. And he's just doing it because he can, because he cares. So you've got these people that are like, I just want to put this out there. LSS are getting a lot more than they pay for from these people, right? They did not ask for this to happen, but these guys just are passionate enough. So like, I won't. I know there are some people that feel like Magic the Gathering might still have the edge there in many ways. Like I think they have a desk, they have a bit more of a traditional esports approach, but I've seen that scaled back. They laid off Paul Cheon, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Like they don't care about broadcast, mate. I'm sorry, they don't. If they're laying that guy off, they don't give a shit. Whereas like we're seeing constant investment on the LSS side in these broadcasts, making them great. No, in no small part because you're asking me to get involved, but also just how they're facilitating for Ethan and Justin to bring their products together. Those two work together in LA, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Justin on the local side, Ethan who came in, and those two had a partnership to sort of make the broadcast the way it was. So it is crazy. It's the best TCG broadcast out there. I think it's already better than Magic. Magic has great commentators, but we stole Cedric, so sorry guys, unlucky. Yeah, it's crazy. It's just so fortuitous to me that it's just a game that I love, that I fell into casting because I wanted to do it, and then it just ended up being a really good place to be a caster if you can get the work.
Yeah, no, it's pretty incredible. And great question, Will. Next question comes from Capolo, who asks, what's your secret to keep a Fab game entertaining to watch when the pace is, much slower and like there are less noticeably exciting moments than things like Overwatch or Valorant?
I'm not jaded enough yet by Fab, I think, to not be excited by every game I see. I just love watching it. I will literally get on Talishar and watch Bunny Strangler 427 take on Player One. I don't care. I would literally sit there and just watch the games. But I do think that in Fab there are stories that happen on 3 levels at a tournament. There are 3 levels of stories, right? Even more than that, honestly. But each turn cycle for me, there's a story, right? There is a player that has tempo, one that doesn't. Literally every turn cycle. So there's a narrative there. I would say each game has a narrative, right? Its own story, because you're looking at 2 different heroes, also 2 different players, different backgrounds, where they've come from, what they're fighting for. And then the tournament itself is like a story in terms of metagame, or in terms of the state of the game, or what the event means in the global Flesh and Blood calendar. So I can just go in and out to all these 3 levels of scale and get excited about the storyline. And that's just the story. That's not even the actual, the hard mechanical side of the game. And then there's a lot of decisions that you have to make. So based on the info that we have, we can make inferences to what a player is trying to deal with, right? We also know we know their strategy, right? Okay, the dash player puts pounder on the table. Okay, we know what they're trying to do. So, the equipment also is very telling in that sense. So, we always talk from the perspective of, even if a player makes a mistake, by the way, and we don't really harp on that because we're always talking about what a player is trying to achieve. So there's always a reason for this. So I have never run out of stuff to talk about unless there's literally no game action happening for quite some time. I cast Prism Mirrors. I will cast Enigma Mirrors, I'm sure. It's fine. I think there's a lot to talk about. I think that, if I don't have any game specific stuff to talk about, I'll talk about something else. I'll talk about a concept. I'll talk about a story. I'll share an anecdote. I'll make a joke or whatever. So I never run out of things to talk about. But I've got a lot of practice at bringing different topics into a broadcast. And I also have a whole ass co-commentator set next to me that we can bounce ideas off of and have discussions. You watch a game that me and Sam O'Byrne cast. My God, we just don't stop talking. It's just constantly. Yeah. So it's not that hard. Game's really interesting, fun. And it's got way more decision points than any other card game. So the script writes itself.
Yeah, and it's always interacting. People are always attacking or blocking for the most part. And you know what? Baseball, 162 games a year, and a lot of them have a lot of dead space, and they have commentators for every one of those games. So, you got to keep that in mind. Now, Vintox asks, what are your favorite and least favorite mechanics in TCGs? And if you can add a mechanic to Fab, what would it be?
Okay, that's interesting. My least favorite mechanics. I hate having cards banished from my hand as an attack reaction for the cost of 3 chi. It really sucks ass. I hate weapons that make it harder to block with. Also, those weapons have fucking piercing. I can't even pivot off of them with armor and have a turn. I hate coercive tendency. That card is not okay. That is actually not okay. I hate attack reactions that are a better rate than warrior ones. Looking at you new players, just a Nick is no, get it out. I hate shred. That's ridiculous. I think that discard mechanics are always hard pills to swallow in TCGs, right? That level of disruption, just because of when you draw, drawing up sort of quite late. I don't mind it though. I think it's really important to have that in the game. I think Spectra is an absolutely god awful mechanic, and as a Dory player, sometimes when I used to play against Prism, I would just be like, why am I at the table right now? It's just no. And it's good because people still sneak into their decks. Spectre is I'm sure you've heard that plenty of times before.
Oh, yeah.
That shit is could I add a mechanic to Fab? I kind of, I mean, they're doing it already. They're doing a lot of these things, right? Sneakily. We've got like double face cards, right? Like mobile double face cards in a way, like the magic lands are. There's a lot of like mechanics that I've sort of seen in other games. I'm trying to think. I was an L5R player for the longest time, and I really loved like how the game was less about turn cycle and you would take turns taking actions until you had no actions left to take. Like I really quite enjoyed that way that flows. Star Wars universe, I think, is like that as well. Be interesting if there's like a more sort of back and forth in the game. But I like the idea of like they're kind of doing it already, but demi heroes. Like I like the idea of like evolving your hero. I think like Grand Archive kind of did that quite nicely as well. Like where your hero would have like a couple different levels, and as the game went on, like you would be able to evolve them to some degree. I'm just a Pokemon stan, and I always love like the idea of sort of evolution. I just think actually no, just give Dory a demi hero. All right, that's all. More like Hill happened, right? Yo, she's you let her go Super Saiyan. We thought we were getting teased with that, by the way, when the Morlock Hill story came out, and really they were just teasing a Blitz card. I was like, oh, bro, a blue non-block, man. That's what could have been. But yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty happy with the mechanics we got so far. Maybe let Warriors draw more cards.
How about that?
Right.
Yeah.
Make it happen, bro. I'm trying to draw.
More card draw. You're after Tarek Patel's heart. When he was on the show, he talked about card draw for about an hour and how awesome it is. And, you know.
I love drawing cards. That is, I mean.
It's hard to argue with it.
I do think that they did a good job with the first counterspell in Flesh and Blood in Rewind. It's really hard to do that well. And I don't think it's, you know, a popular card. And it's obviously not that. But like the idea is interesting. I've always been a control player. So you know, I think like finding a way to like have that level of interaction in the game would be very interesting.
Well, we're about to have an all arcane set. Maybe this is their time. But Mitch, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you giving us your time and chatting with us. Can you please plug anything you'd like to plug? And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at Ubershouts. I am on Instagram at Mitch Uber. I guess I'm out there. Yeah, at the moment, you can see me on the Valorant Champions Tour, VCT, for Americas. You can also find me on the Overwatch Championship Series, and hopefully on a Flesh and Blood, or we're also on the Brawl Stars Championship if you like mobile games. That game's kind of fire. And hopefully on a Flesh and Blood broadcast coming to you soon. I don't know yet. There was a potential of something very fun this year, but I might have a schedule clash for that. But that's it, really. Yeah, and thanks for having me. I've it's been a great time. I've waffled for quite some time, but yeah, hopefully that was what you were looking for, big guy.
Oh, of course it was. It was a great time, and I can speak probably for everybody listening. We'd love to have you on more Flesh and Blood broadcasts. Hopefully sooner rather than later, but you know, you're a busy guy. We understand. You all can continue to find me on Twitter at freshbudspod. Check out the YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. Doing some streams there, some gameplay these days, Riptide gameplay, of course. And check out my other podcast I do with my cousin Matt called Fresh Juice, an indie game podcast. That's a lot of fun. And the Buds Discord, all that's in the show notes. And finally, Mitch, I always like to talk a little bit about food at the end of every show. And one of our listeners, Farsist, asked, what food do you like to eat or restaurant do you like to go to when at a tournament?
Ooh, I love my Fab friends out here because they always seem to know like the places to go, especially if it's like Vegas or Dallas. Like everyone has an idea. I don't know. It's kind of basic. I love sushi, man. I'm just really, really into that. I love all you can eat. I love the fucking conveyor belt ones. That just gets me going. I see something, I eat it. That's real seafood right there. You know, shit. And you want to get something specific rather, it sort of comes to you. So when I'm at a tournament, I try to actually eat less heavy. So if I can get like a little, maybe I'll eat sushi, I guess, but I tend to like try and go for like more basic stuff. I eat the same thing every day. Fun fact, 5 different meals within the day, but each day it's the same 5 meals. So it's a lot of like, you know, grains, it's rice and proteins. It's just the normal gym bro stuff. It's not exciting, but if I divert too much from that at a tournament, I will get discomfort. My body is so used to eating these very basic foods that anything that's overly processed just messes me up. So yeah, and I can't play. I get brain fog if I do that. So yeah, anything that's straightforward. I love poke bowls, man. I guess that's sushi. I mean, I don't know what to tell you, man. I'm just that guy.
That's totally fine. We all understand. Thank you so much. It looks like we don't have time to have Charmer on, but we'll get to him next week. Please, everyone, stay fresh this weekend.